Senior Media Advisor of Europe-Israel Press Association. I'm a former journalist also. I'm still a journalist, still writing. I was for 9 years chief editor of the Belgian news agency, Belga. And so Alex told you the objectives and what we are doing, what we are organizing, such as this briefing. And before going through the program of this great day, let me introduce what I call our dream team. First and foremost, the Israeli team, just in front here, we have Tal Rabina. Tal Rabina, who is the EIPA strategic manager and head of the Israeli office. Himself a former journalist. And then we have Nir Natan, please. Nir Natan, who is EIPA press trip and briefings director. Then we have our team in Europe, David Kalfa, there on the corner. David Kalfa is in fact a fellow researcher at the Institute for Prospective and Security in Europe, but he is also EIPA media advisor in France, in Paris. Then we have Oliver Bradley. Oliver? Yeah, there. Oliver Bradley, who is a media advisor for the German and Italian language media, is based in Berlin. Then we have Katja Bayer. Where is Katja?
I think I'm trying to arrange.
Okay, she is our communication officer based in Paris, and then Aurélie Aladef, communication manager based in Brussels. Today we have a great program, entirely tailor-made for you journalists, with top Israeli, Palestinian and European experts. They will discuss three main topics: the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, 50 years after the Six-Day War, what's going on with the Palestinian national movement, and anti-terrorism in Europe and Israel. First session from 11 to around 11:15 will feature Mike Herzog, who will be presented by Nir Natan. Then the session will be followed by a short coffee break. Then the second session with Bassam 8 from 12:10 to 12:50, chaired by Oliver Bradley. Then we have a wonderful lunch until 1:45. And in the afternoon session will start at 2 o'clock with three guest speakers: Yossi Kuperwasser, Claude Moniquet, and François Esbeau. The session will be chaired by David Kalfa. And around 3 p.m., Alex Benjamin will present the conference conclusion. Each session, as Alex mentioned, will be followed by a Q&A session. And there is also the possibility to have individual interview with the speakers after the conference between 3 and 5:45. But we can also organize interviews in the meantime. If you have any interview request, please connect to Katja and Aurélie. Katja is there.
Yeah.
And yeah, she just arrived. Of course, all the team is there to help you should you have any question or request. And in the name of the EIPA team, I wish you a fruitful and informative day. Thank you very much.
We wanted to, as we say, without further ado, try and dive head first into the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and who better to talk about it than Mr. Mike Herzog, a general in the Israeli army who took part in each and every round of peace negotiations from 1993 till the last one in 2014. So I think if we're looking for someone to give us a very interesting inside take of the peace process, who better to do it than Mr. Herzog. Mike, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here.
want to thank EIPA for arranging this. Talking about the Israeli-Palestinian peace process reminds me of an old Jewish joke about Jews in a village who hired someone, put him on a synagogue and asked him to notify everybody when the Messiah arrives. And when he was asked about his job, he said the pay is not that great, but it's a job for life. So talking about Israeli-Palestinian peace is like a job for life. Unfortunately, I've been involved in negotiations for decades, and peace is very elusive. It hasn't arrived yet, but one must hope and pray like we pray for the Messiah. And we just marked the 50th anniversary to the Six-Day War. Remembering the first day after the war, our then Prime Minister Levi Eshkol established a committee to examine possibilities what to do following the war and the victory and with the territories and so on. And they made some recommendations, but to this day this is elusive. We're now in a situation where the new US administration, the Trump administration, decided to prioritize the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, go for a deal, and launch a process in the foreseeable future. So suddenly this issue, which was marginalized after the collapse of the last round in 2014, came back to the fore. And everybody is now in a waiting mode to see what kind of a process the new administration will launch and when and how exactly it will do so. It wasn't natural that the U.S. administration will prioritize this issue. After all, they have many issues on their plates, on their plate. Defeating ISIS, standing up to Iran, the war in Syria, and other regional and international issues. But for their own reasons, they decided this would be a priority, and here we are waiting to see what they'll do. I had the opportunity of meeting some of the U.S. team, Mr. Greenblatt and some others. They don't disclose much, but they listen, ask many questions. But I think before launching anything, they should ask themselves and answer some tough questions about the process. After all, it's no coincidence that the parties have been trying and failing to reach breakthrough for so many years. And there are indeed several question marks surrounding this intended process by the Trump administration. First of all, when they talk about launching a process or doing a deal, what exactly do they have in mind? There's more than one way of going about it. Are they thinking about essentially the traditional bilateral negotiation process with U.S. mediation, or some kind of a different model? Is their goal to go all the way towards a breakthrough, or just go more incrementally, gradually, step by step? Are they going to prioritize one issue over the others? What role will the Arabs play? The Arab states, the region. Some people talk about a regional process, outside in. There are various phrases to discuss this. And how far is the U.S. willing to push the parties towards a deal? Will they push harder and exact the price if any of the parties says no to them? Or will they just at one point say, okay, we tried, it's too difficult to do, and we leave the parties to themselves? Before answering all these questions, I believe it's this administration should learn some of the lessons from the past. People have been trying to do this for many, many years, and there are some lessons to be learned. And I want to highlight some of these lessons, which I also impressed on the Trump team. By the way, when we talk about the Trump team, there's hardly a team there. There's Mr. Greenblatt, who's the special envoy for international negotiations. There's David Friedman, ambassador in Israel. Above them there is Jared Kushner and then the president, but there is no real team. If you go to Mr. Greenblatt's office, it's him and 2.5 people. There's no, still hardly any nominations in the State Department or NSC. It's very different from past experiences when the US administration launched the process and there was a real serious, significant team with a lot of experts and so on. But it doesn't mean that they cannot start something. I'm just saying that for now, we don't see a real robust team there. So looking at the past and past experiences, I would like to highlight some of my conclusions from over 20 years of negotiating peace and trying to achieve a breakthrough. The first is that you have to realize that there is a very different approach to peace negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians. For Israelis, before they approach the specific details of borders, security, whatever, all the core issues, they want to make sure and be reassured that there is a solid basis of end of conflict, finality of claims and mutual recognition onto which you can add all the details. Put in other words, Israelis want to make sure that we don't just sign a document of peace and then the Palestinian narrative will supersede that piece of paper and they will continue to, for example, educate that we don't belong there and so on. We want to make sure that it's a genuine end of conflict and finality of claims. Put in other words, Israelis want to make sure that what we finalize is not, what we close is not only the 67 file, but also the 48 file, which is about mutual recognition between two nation states, and it's about ending the conflict in real, genuine terms. Palestinians approach this, and by the way, to this day, I'm not sure most Israelis were reassured that this is what's going to happen, which is why, if you look at the opinion polls in Israel, while there's still a majority, a solid majority for political separation, the two-state solution, there's high skepticism on the Israeli side for now that this is achievable. Palestinians approach negotiation in a different manner. For them, it's more like a business transaction. They perceive, they are focused on the 67-5, they are perceived on, their perception is that they are coming to extricate what belongs to them, which is why there's no emphasis on a full give and take process. And this different mindset, this different approach, I think always was one of the stumbling blocks between the parties, and many mediators and many people also on our side were so over-focused on the details of the core issues that they neglected to see the reality of different mindsets and approaches. Then come the details of the core issues, and here I think there are real gaps, not imaginary gaps, between the parties. And on each and every one of the core issues, I can give a full lecture on each and one of them, but I don't want to bore you here. But on each and every one of them, there are significant gaps. Whoever tells you that the gaps are minor, and it only takes political will by any of the parties or both of them, and if you get the right people, you close them in a room, you get it in 15 minutes, excuse me, that's not serious. It's not my experience, okay? There are real gaps. There's one Israeli peace negotiator who wrote a book with a title that we are that close, you know, like the famous painting, fingers almost touching each other. That is not the case. There's no one core issue in which we really reach understanding on borders, territory, security, refugees, Jerusalem, and here we also always separate between narrative issues and practical issues. on none of them we're really close. We sometimes agreed on a headline, but when you go one level down, there's no agreement. For example, let's take security. We agreed on the title that the Palestinian state will be demilitarized. Now, what does it mean that it will be demilitarized? Yes, we agree they will have no tanks and planes, but other than that, we agreed on nothing. Will they have anti-tank weapons, anti-air weapons, electronic warfare capabilities? What kind of military forces or security forces will they have? How will this apply on the ground? We agreed on nothing below that title, and can go each and every one of these issues. So when people talk about gaps and connection to political will of leaders, of course you need political will to do it. But the political will of a specific leader is always tied to a certain basic terms under which he cannot, go for a deal. It's not a deal at any cost. For either Israeli or Palestinian leaderships, there are certain terms. And if you look at public opinions on both sides, you will see, and if you ask them what kind of a deal you're willing to go for, Israeli public opinion and Palestinian public opinion, you will see that they talk about very different terms that don't meet. In order to make ends meet, you need exceptional leadership and exceptional circumstances, which are very hard to get. And this also requires a capable third-party mediator. I'm sorry to say, from my own perspective, that was not the case in the last round of talks we had with the US and Secretary Kerry in 2013-14. I'm not going to expand on it, but I wrote a long article about this. You need a supportive environment, regional or international. You need to marginalize spoilers, and there are always spoilers. And you need to look at it as something which is multi-dimensional. There is a tendency, always was, to single out or cherry-pick only one dimension of this conflict and focus on it as if you fix that, everything else will fall into place. It's much more complex than that. People used to say, if only we got the parties to sit to the table, if only the Palestinians stopped incitement or Israel froze settlement activities, if only we had terms of reference, if only, it doesn't work this way. It's a multi-dimensional effort. There are realities on the ground, there's political horizon, there are bottom-up elements, the economic situation on the ground, governance on the Palestinian side. Gaza is a big issue, and the divide between Gaza and the West Bank. There are many dimensions to this. And there's also one dimension which is, in my view, as a veteran peace negotiator, was always neglected by both parties, and a third party, which is long-term education for peace. In the 90s, in our agreements, we had something called people-to-people, which never materialized because the Palestinians did not want to normalize relations with Israel before a political solution. In our last round with Kerry, in the framework, we had a chapter put by us called Culture of Peace, but nobody for a long time really took it that serious. And I think this is a critical issue. It's not only about signing agreement between two governments. There are also people out there, and you have to educate them and socialize them to peace. Now, I don't know how the new administration will address all of these issues and lessons. It's quite amazing to me that nearly 6 months after this administration took office, both parties still don't know what kind of a process they have in mind. You talk to people on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, after they met President Trump and his team and so on, and you ask them what kind of process are we expecting from the Americans. They don't know. The Americans took time to learn the issues, ask many questions, listened, talked to everybody. posed questions to each of the parties about their own thinking of the process and their own positions on the core issues. And now we're all in a waiting mode to see what kind of process they are going to put on the table, and the parties themselves still don't know. But before they do so, I think we also have to take note at what has changed on the ground since the last round of talks. The last round was in 2013-14, and things changed. Things don't stand still, certainly not in our part of the world. So some things change for the worse, some things change for the better. Let me start first of all with the parties themselves. I think both parties today, both leaderships, have less room to maneuver when it comes to a peace process. On the Israeli side, you have a government, half of whose members don't believe in a two-state solution. The far-right parties are pressing for some parts of the West Bank to be annexed, and they apply a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister. And in my own judgment, I'm not an expert on domestic politics, but my own judgment is that Prime Minister has less room to maneuver today than he had, let's say, 3-4 years ago, when we were then negotiating, and I was then part of the Israeli negotiating team, and or even a back channel. So I think he has less room to maneuver today. And on the Palestinian side, you have a dysfunctional, weak entity, deeply divided between the West Bank and Gaza, and that divide is deepening today as we watch what's happening in Gaza, and things are rapidly developing there. They have a leader, 82 years old, who is talking openly about his desire to depart the scene at one point or another, and everybody is positioning themselves towards the day after. And that leader lost a lot of legitimacy in the eyes of his own people. If you follow Palestinian opinion polls over the last year, you will see that about 2/3 consistently say that he should end his term, he should go. Not that they offer an alternative, but that's what they think. In their mind, he's done, essentially done. So on that front, I think we are worse off than we were, let's say, during the last round of talk. What I think changed for the better is the region. The fact that you have today much closer and better relations between Israel and some of its Arab neighbors, major Arab actors like Egypt, Jordan, some of the Gulf states, the so-called Arab Quartet. We have common interests. We share concerns about regional developments and regional instability, about ISIS, Islamists at large, Iran, instability in the region, and so on. And these parties are willing to play a role in opening space for Israelis and Palestinians to advance in the process. Not necessarily because they care about us or about Palestinians, but because they do care about instability, about the potential collapse of the PA, about the post-Abu Mazen era, and most of all, if you talk to them, and I do, about the possible empowerment of Hamas within the Palestinian National Movement. That is a big deal for them. So that offers some opportunities for working with them on the peace process. I also think that since there's a new administration, there's a sense on both sides that because the administration prioritized this issue and they're taking it seriously, none of the parties wants to say no to this administration, this phase. So there's a sense of maybe a potential to do something there. I would say that once the administration makes a decision, before they make a decision, they should answer some tough questions to themselves. I said to them that if they think, well, I asked them, what's your goal? If they think that they can go all the way towards a breakthrough settling all issues in a detailed, comprehensive manner, they will fail, because I don't think circumstances are right for this. I don't think the parties are right for this. Kerry tried to force such a model on us in 2013. He defined the goal as reaching a full, detailed, comprehensive deal within 9 months, which was totally unrealistic, and after 4 months we had to change course because we all realized that this was unrealistic. If they want to go in a more incremental way, then if they do it the right way, they could improve the situation on the ground. And again, going back to my previous point, they have to look at it as a multi-dimensional picture and address all dimensions, not only one dimension. They can produce fantastic terms of reference, but if the PA collapses, they've done nothing. They can produce fantastic terms of reference, but if we have another war in Gaza, they've done nothing. They have to address all these issues in a very careful manner. One big question before I end is how to involve the region. As I said, we have close relations today. There are opportunities there, and how to involve the region. The traditional model was a bilateral process with American mediation, with the Arab parties providing support, political, economic, and others, from the outside. That process did not yield fruit, and I think won't yield today. But moreover, we can get more from the Arabs. The opposite process, which some people talk about or call outside in, is let's first design a model with the Arabs and only later fit in the Palestinians. I don't think the Arabs will go too far without addressing the Palestinian issues or involving them. So I would advocate an interim model, which is, some people call it a zipper model, where the Arabs put something on the table that opens space for both parties. They can provide space and legitimacy. For example, some measures towards normalizing relations with Israel, and according to media publications, there are talks about it. Those measures can open space for Israel to put more on the table for the Palestinians, and vice versa. That model may be more fruitful, but ultimately much depends on what exactly the Prime Administration is going to, what kind of a process they are going to design, launch, when, how exactly, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Bradley, I'm the colleague for the German and Italian language media for the Europe-Israel Press Association, so welcome to Brussels. My aim is not to spend more than a minute or two here. I would like to invite our illustrious guest, as you see him already, Bassem Eid, to give a lecture. Bassem Eid is probably one of the most outspoken, if maybe not the most outspoken, human rights advocates in the Holy Land. Keep the word very neutral and very, very open. He started out, or let's say his claim to fame began during his work with the B'Tselem organization, which basically was documenting a lot of the human rights issues in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. During the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, Bassem basically woke up that there were issues in nation building for a Palestinian state. One of the worries is, could a Palestinian state be democratic, transparent? How will that look? And one of his biggest focal points went away from the Israeli issues of human rights and focusing more on what's going on in the Palestinian Authority, because for a lot of Palestinians, nation building, there's the worry about what will the Palestinian state look like in the future. And as such, in 1996, he established his Palestine Human Rights Monitoring Group, which basically, up until just a few years ago, he was reporting basically on the human rights abuses, which unfortunately, shortly after its establishment, landed him in jail for just about 26 hours, I believe. Yasser Arafat was not pleased that he was trying, that Bassem Eid was being very transparent, And as such, Bassem had, though, the support of the international community, which after 26 hours, I believe, saw him freed from prison. So we could say that he's a very courageous person, because not only is he, let's say, a harsh critic of a lot of human rights abuses that go on in the Palestinian Authority, he lives within the zone of the Palestinian Authority, so in Jericho. And it's probably not very easy. But people have recognized his courage, and so I'm just going to read off a list of some of the awards he's gotten. And basically, the Association of the Civil Rights of Israel awarded him the Emil Grunzweig Memorial Award in 1992. He received the Robert S. Litvak Human Rights Memorial Award, which McGill University in the United States awarded him. He has received an award from the Italian organization Informazione Senza Frontiere, Information Without Boundaries, and I think the list goes on and on and on. But without further ado, let me introduce you, please, to Bassem Eid, and he will have a lot to tell you, and then I'll be back for the Q&A.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. I think that I have a very loud voice that I don't need to use the mic for it. I would like also to thank the AIPA. Before I went to this section, I thought it's Europe, Israel, Palestinian Authority. But it looks like that it is completely different. Now I realize it much more. Okay, I heard my friend Mike Herzog when he tried also to give his own analysis on the issue of the Palestinians and what is really going on internally. I think that internally the Palestinians looks like even more and more complicated. I'm not quite sure that media or leaders knows exactly what is really going among the Palestinians. If we will take the Gaza Strip, which is, in my opinion, the most interesting part here in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is the Gaza Strip. Is not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. First of all, Gaza Strip. And then afterwards, we can move to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because that's the hard issue today, which is not only Israel is facing, but also the Palestinian leadership is facing, and even Egypt today also facing such kind of difficulties from the Gaza Strip. If we will look today to inside the Gaza Strip, we will find that there are 4 different players playing inside the Gaza Strip. The first player is the Egyptian government. Second player is the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank. The third player, of course, the Hamas. But the fourth player is Israel. Now, what is the difference here between these 4 different players? The first 2 players, which is the Egyptian government and the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank, are very interesting in the destruction of the Gaza Strip, in destroying the Gaza Strip. Why? Because the Egyptian government believes that the Hamas is a terrorist organization. The Egyptian government believes that while more and more pressure Egypt will impose on the Gaza Strip, that's probably the only way to get rid from the Hamas organization. What is the interest of the Palestinian Authority? The interest of the Palestinian Authority that while Egypt imposing more and more pressure on Gaza, that probably will pave the way to the Palestinian Authority to return back to Gaza and to recontrol Gaza like they used to do till 2007. Now, the other 2 players, is Israel and the Hamas, which is, in my opinion, are much more interesting in the reconstructing of Gaza rather than destroying the Gaza. So if the Hamas and Israel almost agreed on the reconstruction of Gaza, where is the conflict? The conflict is that the Hamas said that the priority for the reconstruction of Gaza should have to go to our own tunnels and our military capability. While Israel said, no way, the priority for the reconstruction of Gaza should have to go to the houses and to the other civil facilities which has been destroyed during the summer war in 2004. And this is unfortunately why the whole process of the reconstruction of Gaza almost delayed, because it is an internal fight between the Palestinians themselves, between the West Bank leadership and the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip. Friends, if you will look today to the Rafah passage, during the last year, 2016, the Rafah passage was open only for 20 days. How many Palestinians succeed to cross it from Gaza to Egypt? 20,000 only. If we will move to 2011, how many Gazans succeed to cross the Rafah passage from Gaza to Egypt? 460,000. 500,000. If we will go today to the Rafah passage, you will find over than 30,000 people waiting to cross it. And nobody knows when the Rafah passage will be open. This is the real situation. And no media, by the way, around the world try to report what is the crisis of the Rafah passage and what is behind the Rafah passage from the Gaza Strip. Which kind of people are waiting there? What exactly they want? Nobody wants to help. Of course, the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank wish to see the Rafah passage sealed forever. And with the all meetings, every Monday and Thursday, President Abbas meeting with Sisi. But Abbas never ever asked Sisi to open the Rafah passage even for 1 hour. Because that's the interest of the Palestinian Authority, to impose more and more pressure on the Gaza Strip. Now, in the recent developments in Gaza, with the issue of Mohammed Dahlan, I hope, first of all, that the Dahlan initiative will succeed in a way or another. Dahlan today is the real coordinator between the Hamas and the Egyptian government. And he is already accepted by the Egyptian government and also accepted by the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip. Because what is the interest of Dahlan here is to weaken Abbas more and more as the only competitor to Abbas. To weaken Abbas. This is why Dahlan tried to be in such position today. And Dahlan right now almost accepted by Sisi and by Ismail Haniyeh to be the moderator. What they are talking about now is how to keep the border, the Rafah passage, under the control of Mohammed Dahlan. And Hamas is ready to do it, and the Egyptians will be ready to accept it. That means if Dahlan will be the responsible person on the Rafah passage, that means that the Rafah passage is going to be open for 24 hours. And this is the talks right now. And I hope that he will succeed, because that will only benefit those who are suffering from the closure of the Rafah passage. So this is the recent development. And of course, Abbas is very upset. He's very upset even on Sisi, that Sisi allowing to Mohammed Dahlan to enter Egypt and to conduct a press conferences there. Abbas is very upset. But this is the choice of Sisi. Because Sisi, in such agreement with Dahlan, he is going to hit 2 birds in 1 stone. The first part that Sisi is very interesting to keep Gaza so quiet and no more wars between Gaza and Israel. This is the Egyptian interest. The second interest, that how he can avoid any protection from Hamas towards the extremist Muslims inside Sinai who is fighting and killing the Egyptian soldiers. That's exactly the two issues that Sisi right now is seeking to achieve through the deal with Mohammed Dahlan and Hamas. So this is the part of the Gaza Strip. Now if we move to the West Bank, I am a person who believes that if Mr. Netanyahu tomorrow will meet with President Abbas, probably the first question Netanyahu is going to ask Abbas, whom you are representing, Mr. President? Gaza Strip, West Bank, or Palestinians diaspora? In my opinion, Abbas only representing his two sons and his wife, not to the 2/3 of the Palestinians who are asking to end his job. I think all of the Palestinians calling Abbas to end his job. Friends, if you will move among the Palestinians in the West Bank these days, especially in the refugee camps, you will find that the majority of the Palestinians are people who are seeking dignity rather than identity. Because we are living under a lack of dignity, especially under the Palestinian Authority. And that's showing how much the people are really very busy how to improve their daily life. If you will come today to any ordinary Palestinian in the West Bank and asking him, what are the most three priorities that you are seeking? He will say a job to survive, to secure the education system and the health system for my children. Nobody is talking about settlements. Nobody is talking about the wall. Nobody even talking about the foundation of the Palestinian state. And that means that people are much more busy towards their own economic situation. And that's exactly my message around the world. How we can improve the economic situation of the Palestinians. I think that that's much more important than any peace process or than any kind of two-state solution. Because imagine if we will receive a state tomorrow. Tomorrow, what will happen to us? We will run after the Israelis and bringing them back here. Because we want to survive. We want to survive. And that's sometimes making me so nervous, especially in the parliaments of Europe, when they try to put pressure on Israel to resume the negotiations with the Palestinians, then they said, if Israel is not going to resume the negotiations with the Palestinians, we are going to recognize the Palestinian state. Excuse me, which state you are going to recognize? State which is in a lack of economic sources. State which is in a lack of institutions. A state where is over than 54% of its populations are living in refugee camps. This is not the state that I am looking for. This is not the state that I am dreaming for. I think that we should have to be a little bit more realistic towards the current situation. Okay, Israel is under the criticism of all of the world, every day. What about the Palestinians? What about the corruption of the Palestinian Authority? Looks like to me, and I said it in Arabic in 2 million times to the Palestinians, that we, the Palestinians today, became hostages for our own leadership. Don't tell me that 2 million people in Gaza are supporting the Hamas. Don't tell me that. But you can tell me that the Hamas is holding 2 million Palestinians by force. This is what you can tell me. Even if you are pro-Palestinian, never mind. I am talking with people. I am speaking with people. People crying to me. So if the situation of the Palestinians looks so divided, on which process you are talking about? Which peace you are talking about? Try first of all to bring the Palestinians together. And then afterwards, start building the bridges for the Palestinians and the Israelis to reach each other. Because we have a huge gap, deep gap of hatred right now. How you can bring the Palestinians and the Israelis together? How? Just to bring Netanyahu and Abbas and to take some photos? That's it? This is peace? We almost did it. 300 times we did it. And nothing achieved. I think that leaders should have to start looking to the individuals right now on the both sides, rather than to look to the only leaders of the both sides. That's very important. Now, from the questions that you asked my friend Mike Herzog about Trump, looks like that you have huge expectations from Trump. You know, I met some of the people from his administration that they even ask me not to call them administration right now. I can call them council. Because administration during Bill Clinton were 50,000 people. That's the administration. Today we have 2.5 people talking to each other. So he asked me, please don't call us administration. You can call us a council. So the American council right now is trying to study more and more what is really the problem between the Palestinians and the Israelis. They have no idea, by the way. Before Trump elected, they have no idea. Now they start studying. Then when I ask him, when you think that a clear policy will come out through the American Council towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he said, at least you must have to give us 1 year. 1 year from today, not 1 year from since Trump became a president. Yeah. So we have to count from today, not from January. At least 1 year. Don't expect, if there is no goodwill from the both sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis, to make peace, I don't believe that there is any third party who can impose peace on the Palestinians and the Israelis. So Trump, you can leave Trump. First, let Trump fix his own problems inside the United States. And after he will fix his own problems, then probably he will have some time to look out of the United States. He is moving today from one crisis to another crisis. Look to Iraq, look to Syria, look to Qatar today. Look to Russia and the United States about Syria. Come on. This is an issue for Trump, not the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I used to say, friends, that if we will look to the Middle East map today and how the Islamic terror increasing, you will find that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is probably the most safe place in the Middle East. The most safe place in the Middle East. As a Muslim, as an Arab, I don't want to be in Syria. I don't want to be in Iraq. I don't want to be in Libya. I don't want to be in Yemen. It's much safer for myself and for my children to continue living under the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So probably I will stop right now and giving you some time, maybe for some questions. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Bassam. I'm just going to start with a question because we spoke about something this morning.
Yes.
In 1995, I was in Jericho, your hometown, where you've been living now for several years. And I remember going to a synagogue that was there, and it was guarded by Palestinian police, and it seemed like, oh, life is quite normal. Mm-hmm. My first question to you is, how does it really look on the ground? I mean, you touched on, let's say, the overall picture the geopolitical situation, failed state, do you want to live in a failed state? But really the people on the ground, I mean, beyond the economic question in their pockets, is there, from your point of view, really the hope that there can be a coexistence between Jews and Arabs in a true, lasting, let's call it a sustainable peace?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell you that yes, right now. Because while people are much more busy with their economic issues, they are less scared about anything else beside them. And if we will take Jericho, by the way, Jericho is a very interesting place because since the so-called Second Intifada until today, Jericho wasn't in the news at all. People are so peaceful there, and people are just seeking a better level of life. Now, we have in Jericho today 500 women, Palestinian women, who are traveling early morning to Ma'ale Adumim settlement, cleaning houses. 500. I have a list of the names. 500. Cleaning houses. Cleaning houses means that one can clean 2 or 3 houses and one woman can earn around $300 a day. $300 a day. What is the average monthly salary today under the Palestinian Authority? $400 a month. Imagine, from $400 a month to $300 a day. So she can fight from here to the Philippines to continue keeping a such level of life. Now, besides that, if you will go to Mashor Adumim, you will find that there is around 7,000 Palestinian workers only from Jericho working in Mashor Adumim. Working in Mashor Adumim. What that means, I think that that's showing the goodwill of those workers who just want to survive in peace. They probably will not come and say to you that, listen, I love the Israelis, but at least he has a very good relationship with them. I know that these people are sitting on breakfast together. I know that these people are sitting on lunch together. So probably he will not tell you what exactly he's feeling because he's scared. Because he is scared from the Palestinians, not from the Israelis. But as I know, I used sometimes to be in Akbet Jabir refugee camp in the evenings. And people, you know, used to receive some telephone calls from friends here. And it's so lovely to sit in the middle of Akbet Jabir refugee camp, which is under the Palestinian Authority jurisdiction, and people talking in Hebrew. Oh, Yossi, ma shlocha, ma inani, matay tavo levaker oti. But, what's happening here? Yeah, I think that people trying to show their goodwill towards their own colleagues. And that's the most important thing. Never mind what Abbas is doing, and never mind what the Hamas is doing, but at least I know exactly how to continue keeping my own survival.
You mentioned one key word, refugee camps, and refugee is always a very important word because I believe in 2002 when there was maybe the closest deal that ever happened between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority to establish a two-state solution. Again, the return and refugee question was always a question. And we know that there is only one group of people in the world today that has a perpetual refugee status that gets inherited on through the generations, which will that be a resolvable issue to not perpetuate
See,
the refugee status?
myself is a refugee. I developed in a refugee camp for 33 years. My 6 brothers are still living in Shafat refugee camp in Jerusalem. I am a person who almost visited all of the refugee camps in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Jordan. By the way, I'm living in East Jerusalem, but I'm still holding the Jordanian passport, which is allowing me to travel to some Arab countries. I was in the refugee camps. I didn't see one Palestinian refugee believes that the right of return will be applicable. I didn't see, personally. Of course, people are shouting today for the right of return because people are seeking a better level of life. People want to be in a better situation. So this is why they are seeking the right of return. But a very remarkable Palestinian organization in 2009 conducted a survey among the Palestinians diaspora in Jordan, in Syria, and in Lebanon. And the question was, what is the status you are looking for to solve your problem? 70%, 70% asked for compensation. Asking for compensation means that people want to improve their own life, but in the meantime, that means that people never believe that the right of return would be applicable. This is exactly. And I think that the survey is available on the internet. It was published by one of the famous Palestinian researchers in Ramallah, Khalil Shikaki. Khalil Shikaki, very remarkable person, no doubt. He published such kind of study in 2009. What's happened one day after he published this study? The Fatah movement burned his offices in Ramallah. Because this is something that you shouldn't have to put it out. You shouldn't have to put it out. They burned the offices in Ramallah. So I think that the refugees are really in a big trouble. Now, sometimes I used to say that the tragedy of the Palestinian refugees is the Arabs more than the Israelis. It's the Arabs. Now, the Arabs in 48 opened their doors to those hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. And the Arabs used to recognize these people as their own citizens, by the way. From 48 until 64. What's happened in 64? When Yasser Arafat was elected as the chairman of the PLO, the first thing that Yasser Arafat did, that he visited all of the Arab countries. And he met with the Arab leaders in 64. And he told the Arab leaders, please stop recognizing the Palestinian. You mean ISIS here? ISIS?
Yeah.
Or any other groups?
Islamists in general, and are the ISIS more
The
growing
problem
than the
that these
others?
people will never ever be kicked out. This is the problem. Because Islamists dealing with Islamists. Yeah?
Yeah.
Hamas also Islamist Sunni. And the ISIS is also Islamic Sunni. So they will never be kicked out. Why? Because Hamas is using these people from time to time. They are using them. So they will never kick them out. If you hear just a few days ago, there was a big suicide bombing in one of the checkpoints in Sinai, where is 10 Egyptian soldiers killed. 10! That's really a tragedy. After the investigation of the Egyptian security force, they found that 3 of the killed terrorists used to be under the shelter of Hamas in Gaza. 3. This is very new, last week. This is very new. Imagine right now how much the Egyptian government will be so angry on the Hamas. Because the Egyptian government knows about specific people, I think we talk about 500, wanted people by the Egyptian government are staying in Gaza right now. And this is one of the most important negotiations today between the Egyptians and the Hamas and Mohammed Dahlan, that those 500 people must have to be given to us immediately before we reach any kind of deal. So that's the problem, that these people are under the care of the Hamas right now in the Gaza Strip, because they are using them whenever they want. That's a big problem. Please.
Does the Palestinian Authority has a database of all the refugees all around the world?
The Palestinian Authority still don't have database for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza.
So it is impossible to make elections in this way.
Well, elections, if they want to make elections, they can manage it.
With the ink.
Now, the problem is that those Palestinian refugees diaspora are living under the responsibility of UNRWA, the UN Workers and Relief Agency. And as I know, since 20 years ago, UNRWA didn't conduct any census among the Palestinian refugees in diaspora. So some people talk about 4 million, some people talk about 5 million. Saib Arikat talk about 6 million. I don't know Abbas talking about how much. So we don't have a real number. But the only one who knows the real number is UNRWA. And UNRWA right now refuses to release such kind of number. But today, since let's say the so-called Arab Spring started, today you have around the world more refugees, Iraqis and Syrians than Palestinians. More. If you will take Jordan today, today the Palestinians in Jordan are the minority. They are not the majority. We used to be the majority. Today they are the minority. Today you have around 4 million Syrian guys living in Jordan. 4 million. You have around 1.5 million Iraqi people. You have another 500,000 Egyptian workers over there. What is the total inhabitants of Jordan according to the last census last September? 9 million people. 9 million people. So we, the Palestinians, are the minority today. In Jordan, we are not the majority. So since the Arab Spring until today, I think that there are more refugees from Syria, from Libya, look to Yemen. Look to Yemen today. More than the Palestinians. And nobody is scared, by the way, about them.
You had a key word, just one second, you had a key word, UNRWA, United Nations, UNESCO, etc. Oftentimes the UNESCO decisions, especially the recent one on Hebron, has posed some disappointment on the Israeli side. Do you see that the United Nations, UNRWA, UNESCO, that it is an organization that is conducive to trying to establish a peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis?
You know, last year in May, I was invited for a conference in the United Nations in New York. And that was my first time entering the UN in New York. I never been invited there. So when I start speak there, the first sentence I remember that I said in the UN, that as a Palestinian refugee, I wish to hold the keys of this building and then I will lock it forever. Because in my opinion, the United Nations, since its establishment until today, I think that they created more conflicts around the world rather than they solve conflicts. Because these people want to keep themselves very busy, you know. They are also looking for Messiah, Mike, yeah? They're looking for Messiah. They need a job forever. This is the problem of the UN, in my opinion. Now, UNESCO, okay, UNESCO making so many big decisions. The question is, after all of these UNESCO decisions, will the Palestinians get a state? Of course not. Of course not. Israel can, UNESCO tomorrow can say that the all houses in Haifa are a Palestinian property, it's not an Israeli. Would that make sense for me? Would that make sense? You want me just to sit on the chair and to wait for a new resolutions of the UNESCO? That will never solve my problem. I didn't see that the UNESCO is a part of the solution, but I can look to the UNESCO as a part of the conflict, unfortunately.
There was a question in the back.
Yes.
Hi.
Please
What role
introduce
do you
yourself.
think the EU plays? Is it a positive role or a negative role within the
EU.
conflict?
The question if the EU has any role here. Because looks like the EU also sometimes hesitating to do or not to do, to make it or not to make it. You know, we used to say that the American policy is completely unbalanced policy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I can also say that the EU policy is unbalanced policy also on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because the problem of Europe, in my opinion today, is how to support the Palestinians, but not how to solve the problems of the Palestinians. And this is how, unfortunately, since 24 years, since the Oslo Agreement, this is exactly what Europe is doing. How much money you need at the end of the month? I need 50 million. Okay, no problem. Tomorrow you will get it. But listen, we need to solve it. Yeah, okay, wait. We still have money. Europe still has money to continue supporting the conflict, in my opinion, supporting the conflict for another 24 years at least. At least. So I didn't see that Europe is really playing any kind of role here in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Good afternoon to everybody. I'm David Kalfa, based in Paris. I'm a researcher myself, in my PhD in Israel, and a few years ago I worked for the French Foreign Ministry. The topic of this panel is the following: from Al-Qaeda to ISIS, strategies for countering terrorism in Europe and Israel. Well, the idea is very simple. We will have for each of the panelists a 15-minute speech before we give you the opportunity to ask questions. I will start by the bio, as we're a bit late, and I will start with François Esbourg. Maybe François, if you agree, you will start. François Esbourg is the chairman of the Foundation Council of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, a well-known strategist and expert on international affairs and defense issues, including, of course, terrorism. He began his career working for the Center of Analysis, Planning and Strategy of the French Foreign Ministry, le CAPS, was subsequently first secretary at the French Permanent Mission to the UN in New York. He has since served on several French government advisory bodies, as a member, for example, of the Defense and National Security White Paper Presidential Commission in 2008 and in 2013, and on the steering committee for the White Paper on terrorism. Since 1998, François Esbourg has been chairman of the Geneva Center for Security Policy, and has served since 2005 as a special advisor for the Foundation for Strategic Research, which is one of the French leading think tank. He was recently the head of the defense desk of Emmanuel Macron's team during the last presidential election campaign, and he authored Commentaire de la guerre contre le terrorisme, how to lose the war against terrorism, in 2016. So maybe, François, if you agree, maybe we'll start with you. I'll give you the floor, and then, of course, I will present your dear colleague.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure being here. It's easier to write a book on how to lose the war against terrorism than to write a book about how to win the war against terrorism, but maybe I'll get there someday. No, to be serious. The topic we're supposed to talk about is called From Al-Qaeda to ISIS, what strategies are the most effective in combating terrorism? And the operative word here is effective. Define effectiveness. what is the meaning of being effective against terrorism? Well, you can only be effective against terrorism if you understand the nature of terrorism. And the nature of terrorism is twofold. The first is that terrorism is a criminal activity. Violent, lawless, certainly against the law. But insofar that it is criminal, the fight against terrorism and the fight against terrorism are going to resemble, in some aspects, the fight against crime more than the conduct of regular Clausewitzian warfare. There is no beginning and there is no end in terms of fighting crime. That does not mean that you cannot be effective in fighting crime, but you must know that there is not going to be a clear end point and that you cannot claim total victory. There is no 11th of November, there is no 8th of May when it comes to the fight against terrorism and measuring effectiveness. Secondly, terrorism is a means of communication. This is what makes it very different from most other forms of crime. It is violence to communicate. It is violent communication. This is what the anarchists in the 19th century, who were, by the way, very effective as terrorists, are called propaganda by the deed. La propagande par le fait. And if you do not treat the communication aspect of counterterrorism as seriously as you treat the preventive and repressive parts of the fight against terrorism, chances are that you're not going to win. Terrorism is about ideology. It's about communicating an ideology. Ideology broadly defined. It can be religious, it can be agnostic, it can be atheist, it can be whatever. But there is, it can be nationalistic, but there is a political, ideological substrate. If you accept those two characteristics of terrorism, effectiveness is going to be measured according to two metrics. One metric is that you are going to reduce the semantic and political gratification which the terrorists get from their activity. That sounds very soft, but it only sounds soft. This in practice means that you are going to play the battle of words just as seriously as you're going to play the kinetic battle. What does the battle of the words mean in the current circumstances? Talking about Al-Qaeda, about Daesh, about what may follow, Al-Qaeda 2.0 or whatever. Well, first of all, you don't want to pay Daesh or Al-Qaeda or the jihadis more broadly in their own preferred currency. Do not describe them the way they want to be described. Do not call them fighters. Being a fighter is a very noble thing to do. You want to facilitate the recruitment of young, disaffected people into Daesh? Call them fighters. Now, this may sound so obvious that you would normally come to the conclusion that nobody uses the word fighter. And yet, if you walk a few dozen yards away from here, you will find specialists who currently are working about the problem of returning fighters. They're not returning fighters, they're returning terrorists. You do not talk about war, not because you shrink away from the use of the word war. I have no problem with using extreme violence against the terrorists. But don't turn it into a war, because if you have a war, you have an army and you have soldiers. That is also noble. Jihad, in the hardest interpretation of that word. You do not talk about the state. To have a state is one of the most basic foundations of human society. If you call something a state, you are already giving it greater dignity than if you call it a band of gangsters. And here we have been for years talking about Islamic State. This is what they call themselves. And we call them that the same way too. Very, very strange. Don't use words which imply that you have already lost. One such word is, in the French context, is the word resistance, résistance. Oh, résistance, a very noble word. World War II, the Maquis fighting against the barbarian Germans, etc. But of course, for that to happen, you have to be invaded first and occupied. So if you start talking about resistance, you're actually indicating that you are already viewing yourself as being on the losing side. This is very, very unsmart. And I could go on for quite some time. But as Camus put it much better than I could in 1944, he said, mal nommer les choses, c'est contribuer au malheur du monde. To use words badly, not to name things well, is to add to the unhappiness of the world. This is one major part of the fight. And insofar that we are now seeing the end of the territorial project of Daesh in Mosul and Raqqa, etc., this may actually be quite a good time to do some serious overhaul of our semantic, of the semantic part of our counter-terror front. And of course, last but not least, in terms of the battle of the words, our politicians, and I say politicians, not the media, and I'll explain why, our politicians should not hype up the level of the terror threat more than it deserves to be hyped up. Yes, of course, when you have 191 people killed in Madrid, which is still the largest single terror incident in Europe since the end of the Second World War, 2004, of course it's a very big thing. But you don't want to make life too pleasant for the recruiters of jihad by demonstrating that you're changing the character of your own polity in your reaction against his misdeeds. When we had the 13th of November 2015 attacks in Paris, a terrible occurrence, we demonstrated to Daesh how effective Daesh was. We held a congress of both houses of our parliament, in which our president at the time gave a big speech on what we were going to do to change our society to make it more effective in the fight against terrorism. This is something the Spanish did not do in 2004. This is something the British did not do in 2005 after the 7th of July. This is not something the Knesset and the Israeli government do. Don't build up these guys more than they deserve to be built up. Second metrics, prevention and repression. And here I will, as I did with the Battle of the Words, start saying about what one should not do. First of all, identify the Schwerpunkt, the center of gravity of your strategic effort against terror. It is very tempting, if you are a politician, and when you've had an act of terror on your territory, to do stuff which is very spectacular. What is spectacular on television or in streaming will, for example, be a nice big air raid against Raqqa. This is what we did on the 15th of November 2015. I don't mind doing air raids against Raqqa, indeed it would rather please me. But whether this was smarter than doing a bit of overhaul of our internal security service is highly debatable. And of course the cost of the Rafale is actually rather greater than the cost of the internal security service. You obviously need both. but you don't want to get the proportions wrong between what you do at the national level, what you do at the European level, and what you do at the international level. And we have not been used to thinking strategically. And that leads me to a positive recommendation, rather than to the negative one I just made. Positive recommendation is that the first thing you need is to actually have the institutions, organs, process, practices, which make you able to conduct the fight against terror strategically. The British have understood this for quite some time. It's well worth looking at the British experience, not because the British are necessarily smarter than we are, but simply because they had to deal with the IRA and 4,000 people killed, which is not a minor number, over a period of 30 years. And they tried everything in the book, like internment, like torture, hunger, massive hunger strikes, etc. They tried every single item you could think of before deciding to become effective and clever. So we know what they actually taught us what not to do and what to do. One of the things they have done, so one of the things the Israelis have done, the Americans have done, is to have at the top executive level, in our case the French presidency, is to have the ability to conceive of the battle against terrorism in a strategic manner. In a country like France, until the intent of doing so was announced 2 weeks ago, we did not have that. This is actually quite surprising. In an old centralized Jacobin country like France, we did not have the basic prerequisite for a successful conduct of counter-terror, which is the ability to formulate and conduct a strategy. We're finally getting there. The second thing, of course, to avoid, coming back to the negatives, is you obviously want to avoid uniting those who may be hostile to you, and you, by the same token, want to avoid enlarging their recruitment pool. There is an old American saying, which is, if you treat people like shit, they act like shit. If you treat every single Muslim in the street as if they were a would-be terrorist, chances are higher that they would become a terrorist than if you did not treat them as such. That again is not a form of angélisme or wishful thinking. It is very basic strategic, a very basic strategic approach. We must be strong and united, and we must divide the opposition and not unite it. These are very basic principles, but we forget these basic principles. When the outgoing French president stated in November of 2015, that all dual nationals could be shorn of their nationality as a constitutional principle, elevating this to a constitutional principle. And since in France about 2/3 of our dual nationals do come from North African countries, this was obviously an excellent way of demonstrating that there were two categories of French people: those who are really French, who could not be shorn of their nationality, and those who could. I happen to belong to the second category, by the way, I'm a dual national. Daesh could not have wanted anything better than that. This is exactly how to lose the war against terrorism. And this is only one example amongst others. So as Obama would have put it, while not always following his own advice, he said, don't do stupid stuff. Well, he occasionally did, but his urging was actually quite correct. And we have been doing some quite stupid stuff. On the what we should do side, very quick. First of all, as I said earlier on, it's always good to have a look at what the British have done, for better or for worse. If you're Belgian, if you're Dutch, if you're French, if you're German, or Italian, this is a good starting point because of the history of the British in this regard. Secondly, take the European dimension very, very seriously. And I'm not so much talking about sharing and exchange of intelligence, and this is something which my friend Monique, I'm sure, will touch on. I'm talking about even more basic stuff, which is, for example, having common standards for biometric, machine-readable identification in the member states of the European Union. The French and the Italians are particularly delinquent in this regard. If you are a would-be jihadi, falsify a French ID card or buy one on the black market or on the grey market. That is something which is not difficult to do. Much more difficult if you try to make yourself to pass off as a Portuguese or an Estonian jihadi. So take that seriously. Thirdly, emphasize, and here the Israeli example I would cite very strongly, emphasize the intrusive, massive investment by the state of the information and big data sphere. This obviously poses civil liberties issues. Israel is a democracy and has managed to find a way to balance these concerns, something to look at quite carefully. And my own benchmark here is very pragmatic. That is, I consider that it is unacceptable that a democratic state should be deprived of access to private data which every single person in this room and outside of this room is signing off on a daily basis to every Tom, Dick and Harry selling whatever they want on the internet. The amount of data that we provide to corporations and internet operators, and which we prevent the state from having access to, this is quite extraordinary. We accept that private interests take hold of our data, are enabled to resell that data, by the way. There are businesses which are specialized in rebuying the data that you may have passed on, I don't know, to Coca-Cola or IKEA or whoever. And the lists and the areas of interest of the purchasers will then be resold to a specialist broker who will then resell them, for all that I know, to the Chinese Secret Service. There is no impediment to doing so. So if this is the privacy-less world which we accept to live in, then I consider that at least our democratic states, which are answerable to us, unlike these private interests, should have an access which will be no less. On this one, I am rather harsher than most of our governments are ready to be at this stage. And in conclusion, two short sentences. One, learn from others. This implies readiness. We all know that human experience is not readily transferable. That terrorism is one area in which we have a vested interest in learning from others. And secondly, organize yourself to act strategically. This is what I said about the French case that you went to. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, François, for your very interesting intervention. It reminds me a joke about problems. You know, it's sometimes more difficult to define a problem than to solve it. And indeed, the definition of terrorism is very important if you want, of course, to adopt the proper strategy. I would go now to Claude Moniquet. Claude Moniquet is a Franco-Belgian well-known expert on counterterrorism. He has worked as a reporter for the French press as well as for the DGSE, the French external secret services. He began his career as a journalist specializing in Eastern Europe, and he worked simultaneously as a journalist, as an intelligence agent, operating extensively in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. He's the author of several books on the intelligence services and jihadi terrorism, and he's a co-founder and director of the European Strategic Intelligence and Security Center based in Brussels. Claude Monica, if I understood well, you will mainly dedicate your speech to Daesh after its military defeat in Mosul yesterday, and you will try to answer the following question: what's next? Does the victory signal the end of the caliphate and ISIS jihadist ideology? The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Yes, I will try to touch two points today. The first one is the current situation of Daesh and the future of Daesh. And the second one, but I will be short on the second one, is the discussion on the so-called project of a European FBI. And I will tell you what I think about. First, for Daesh, I will begin by quoting someone. Someone said one day, speaking of this organization, 80% of the 42 main leaders of Daesh are killed. No, the center has no more contacts with the local branches. The organization is just existing in some places in northern Iraq. If you close your eyes, you can think that this was said a few days ago after the fall of Mosul. Actually, it was said on June 4, 2010, after the surge by David Petraeus, and the time Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which was the father or the mother of Daesh, was virtually completely defeated and destroyed. And less than 3 years later, in April 2003, they proclaimed the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and a year later, they proclaimed the Caliphate. What I want to explain today, very shortly, is that Daesh is a success story because Daesh has an extraordinary capacity of resilience. They are extremely resilient, and they proved it they demonstrated it in the last 20 years. Because Daesh is not a new organization. I know that you are working for media, so I certainly not intend to say negative things about press coverage and this kind of thing. But if you read the newspapers, you could imagine that Daesh appeared in 2014 with the Caliphate, maybe in May 2014 with the attack on the Jewish Museum in Brussels, which was, by the way, the first attack outside the Syro-Iraqi territory by people from Daesh, sent by Daesh. You could think that it's a very new organization. Daesh was created 20 years ago, in 1999. At the time it was a very, very small Jordanian organization created with the support of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda by a man which is today dead for 10 years, but extremely well known, which was, of course, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And the organization at the time was named Jamaat al-Tawhid al-Jihad, Organization of the Unification, Monotheism, and Holy War. It was really, really a very, very small, very tiny organization. In French, we will say, ils étaient capables de se réunir dans une cabine téléphonique. They could meet and gather all their people in a phone cabin, in a telephone cabin. Very small organization, maybe a few dozen of people. And then they understood, al-Zarqawi understood that the beginning of the war in Iraq in 2003 was maybe his moment. They went from Jordan to Iraq, and a few months after the war began in March 2003, In July 2003, we had the first terrorist attack in Baghdad against the UN headquarters, and then it never stopped. And after 2 years or 3 years after, Daesh, at the time Al-Qaeda in Iraq, was a branch of Al-Qaeda, the global Al-Qaeda. It was a powerful organization, attracting hundreds of people coming from the Western world, mainly from Europe. At the time, we were absolutely astonished by this amount of people. We said a few hundreds of people, 400, 500 people willing to leave in Europe to go to make the jihad and to die in Iraq. This is something incredible. Today, there are approximately 10,000. So the scale has changed. But I come back to this those days of 2000, between 2007, the very beginning of the surge, and 2010, when Al-Qaeda in Iraq was virtually destroyed. They survived. They created the Islamic Caliphate, and today we hear that they lose Mosul a few years ago. They will lose Raqqa in days or weeks. We even were told this morning once again that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Caliph, was killed by the Russians on June 20, as the Russians said. We have absolutely nothing to support this assertion today. The only thing I can say about this is that when you read in the newspaper, I'm sorry, again, in the newspaper, that a source near Daesh confirmed the fact that the Caliph is dead, it means nothing. Daesh is never communicating this way. Daesh never communicates by a source near the organization. Daesh has very official and very efficient channels of communication, various means, but never a source near the organization. So wait, maybe al-Baghdadi is dead, possible, but wait the official confirmation coming from an official channel of Daesh to believe it. And even if the Caliph is dead, al-Baghdadi is dead, we will all die one day or another. Even if he's dead, it doesn't change anything. Like the fall of Mosul doesn't change a lot. We know for at least the mid-16, the spring of last year, we know that Daesh has largely anticipated the fall of Mosul and Raqqa and the loss of the territorial state. I'm sorry to use this word, but it's easier. The territorial state they built. And they are absolutely prepared to go back in the underground, probably in the north of Iraq, in some parts of Syria, somewhere at the border between Syria and Iraq, and they will just spend months, probably years, to rebuild the organization. And they will very likely, I'm afraid, they will very likely succeed. Why? First, because nothing will really change. I explain what I want to say. First, I told you about the strength and the resilience of the capacity of the organization. Secondly, they prepared for. They had approximately 2-3 years between 2013 and 2016. They had 3 years to prepare stocks of arms, of chemicals for explosive, channel of communications, hidden safe houses for their leaders and so on. So they have clearly, I guess, an illegal and underground infrastructure already in place in Syria and Iraq. The second time is that the situation in the Middle East, in Syria and Iraq specifically, will continue to nourish Daesh. It will not change. It will not. The people who think that in a few months we will see the end of this war, all the Syrians will be in joy, and all the Iraqi will embrace each other. and they will all build two very nice states, very modern and very democratic, are just dreaming. It won't happen. Syria and Iraq will never again exist as the states we knew in the past. Never. Never. Nobody will force the Sunni and the Shia in Syria to live together after 3-4 years of a terrible civil war. Not to mention the question of the Kurd state in Iraq and very likely in Syria, and the impact the creation of a Kurd autonomous province in Syria will have on Turkey, which will never certainly not accept it, especially because the Kurdish in Syria are not the same as the Kurdish in Iraq, and they are linked to the PKK, the YPG's armed branch of the PKK, which is not a big friend of Turkey. So the disorder will remain. The destabilization, decomposition of the Middle East will continue and will nourish the sectarian tensions in the Middle East, and so it will nourish a rebirth of, very likely, a rebirth of Daesh. And my last point, the last thing making that I'm quite sure Daesh will have a second life, or a third or sixth or seventh life, is the fact that I have a great confidence in the Iraqi authorities. I trust them, and I trust them so much that I'm absolutely sure that they will commit exactly the same mistakes they committed since 2004-2006. That means ruling Iraq with a sectarian jihadi, Shia view, and oppressing the Sunni people. And so the Sunni people, which today are probably divorcing from, separating from the Daesh because Daesh is too extremist and just draw the war once again to Iraq, they will maybe in 1 or 2 years they will go back to Daesh because they will try to protect themselves and to defend themselves against the sectarian views and the sectarian actions and the sectarian crimes of the Shia government in Baghdad. That's another thing I'm sure, and that's why I think that the future of Daesh is not very bright for the moment. But it's an organization which exists since 20 years and will continue to exist for a few years. They have a word for this. They have a word which is even a slogan in a motto in the language of Daesh, which is Bakia. Bakia in Arabic, you can translate it by it remains, it survives. If the chief of a Katiba showed Dawlat al-Islam, Islamic State, his followers will answer Bakia, it exists. And it's really a slogan, Bakia. Islamic State, Daesh, Bakia. It will continue for a while. We could discuss after in the question, we could discuss the effect it will have on Europe. This is another point I don't want to enter today. I will finish with the question of the European FBI. It was proposed, it was not really proposed, but some people, some high-level political leaders in Europe, for instance, the Belgian Prime Minister, said that the creation, the foundation of a European FBI is a good idea. I perfectly understand why he thinks this. FBI, European FBI is a very good idea for the small states, which have no very efficient intelligence services, which have not enough means to fight terrorism. It's not a very good idea for the big states. And unfortunately, big states, big administration, big intelligence services like the French ones are the main providers of intelligence on terrorism in Europe today. So I don't see exactly what they will win in the creation of this European FBI. But more seriously, five negative points on this idea. The first one, clearly, the European FBI will be a political decision at 27 states. So, if you take into account the fact that definition of terrorism and the fight against terrorism is not exactly seen in the same way, for instance, in Denmark and in France, it will be a political agreement at the least common denominator, which will not really help, probably. Secondly, big question, this European FBI, with the United Kingdom or without the United Kingdom, which will leave Europe in 2 years? Probably without. Can we really build a European intelligence service without the British? I'm not really sure of that. Secondly, yes, thirdly, yes, I told you, the small state will certainly benefit from this creation, but not the great. So they won't be very pleased to share what they have. We have the example today with Europol in Den Haag, in Netherlands. Europol is trying to play a game in counterterrorism for 15 years now. That just tell me that I speak for 15 minutes, but I ask you 1 or 2 minutes more and I finish. So yes, Europol is trying to play his game in this party, but it doesn't work. France, for instance, doesn't give this information to Europol. Why? Why do we need to share what we know with those people in Den Haag? They won't do it. And they won't do it today, tomorrow, if we have a European FBI. The fourth point is that we have to recruit people to this new FBI. So we have 2 solutions. We'll hire people from nowhere, coming from universities, from young students, graduates and so on, without any experience, and we'll have at least 5 years to train them and to give them an idea of what is, not to make them intelligence officers, but to give them an idea of what is intelligence and how it works. Or we will take the people in the existing services in Europe and we will weaken the existing services. And the same with the money. Our services in each country say we don't have enough money, we don't have enough computer, enough translators, enough name it. So our national services need the money. We won't give them the money. We will give this money, probably a large amount of money, to a so-called European FBI, which will maybe exist in 5 years, which will maybe be efficient in 10 years. But the threat is today and tomorrow, not in 10 years. So I'm not really sure it's that's why I don't really believe that this idea of European FBI has a great future. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude Monique, for your intervention. As you understood, we are late. So I really want to have for you, of course, to give you the opportunity to ask questions. So we'll go directly to our next speaker, Yossi Kupavasser. Yossi Kupavasser is a Brigadier General Senior Project Manager at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, JCPA, which is one of the leading Israeli think tank. He was the former Director General of the Ministry of International Affairs and Strategy. He has a long career in the Army, in the IDF. He was the head of the Analysis and Prediction Division of the Military Intelligence, Amman. He had a significant role in determining Israel's coping methods with terror as well as regional developments. Mr. Kupavasser authored a wide variety of publications on the Middle East, on terrorism, and on intelligence, including the last one, the national security aspect of fighting terror. And he will deal today and talk about the Israeli, I would say, case study, as I don't think that it makes sense to speak about a model, but a case study that would be very interesting to look at it and maybe to draw lessons.
Thank you very much. And, after my 2 predecessors said so many things that are correct in my mind, so I'll try not to repeat what they said. First of all, I know the journalists are really serious people. Let me refer you, and I saw some people did that already. Let me refer you to some of these publications that were mentioned here, because I think it's worth reading, and I will speak about 3 publications of recent publications. One is a paper we issued in the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs called Lessons from Israel's Response to Terrorism. You can read it. In it there are 2 chapters I wrote, one about cyber terror and one about the national security aspects of fighting terror. I will also refer you to a project that we have done in the center about that's called The Knife and the Message, that summarizes what we have experienced in Israel on the knife attacks between October 2015 and March 2016, and why it started and why it stopped or diminished dramatically. And these are lessons that are also, in my mind, relevant to what's happening in Europe these days. And finally, to another aspect of this entire issue, and this is the culture in which this kind of terrorism grows. A paper I authored called Incentivizing Terrorism, and speaks about the payments of salaries to the Palestinian terrorists who are in Israeli jails, but also looks at the ideological background of that, not only on how much money is spent and so on and so forth, but itself an important and interesting point, but also the background of that. And my addition to what my 2 predecessors said was, I fought terror for ages now, years, and I was the chief intelligence officer of our Central Command responsible for the West Bank, in the years 98 to 2001, before the beginning of the Second Intifada. I did most of the planning for the Second Intifada, and then I was the head of the, I was the head of the Research and Analysis Division in the IDF Military Intelligence, from which I was again responsible for the intelligence for that purpose. So I can say about my experience, okay, I can speak about my experience in here. And the most important thing that I would like to say in this personal experience is that fighting terror is a matter of who has a faster ability to study, to learn, and who does his learning in a better way. That's the most important thing, because it's a competition of learning. Terrorists are very good learners. And they adapt themselves, as Claude says here, to all kinds of difficult situations and quite rapidly. So in order to be effective, and you spoke about effectiveness, in order to be effective you've got to have a very robust system of learning, a very thorough system of learning, and a system of learning that in which you have involved all the people who have the decision-making responsibility, because they really are interested in learning, and all the experts that are relevant to this process that can contribute to the quality of the learning. And the learning should focus on the issue of the system in which this battle is being fought. Who are the players? What motivates them? What kind of contradicting, complementary tensions identify each one of them? Because it's not just, okay, let's do terror attacks. They have all kinds of other things that they have to take into account, other considerations. We want to be able to affect the tensions they face. And we have to eventually come to the point where, as a result of our learning, we shall be able to convince them that it is not in their benefit to stick to the policy of terrorism. And this, once we manage to do that, we shall be effective. We shall sort of not win, but have our goals achieved, okay? Because winning is when they say that they change their ideology, when they change their goals. That is something much farther than just changing the methods they use in order to get their goals. But changing the methods is also something worth achieving. It took us in Israel 5 years to convince the Palestinian terrorists to give up on suicide bombing. 5 difficult years in which we paid the lives of 1,000 people. It took us another, I would say, 6 years, 7 years, to convince the Palestinians to reconsider the idea of launching rockets against Israel centers, population centers. Today, they are very cautious on that. It's been now 3 years since they decided that these methods are not that good for them. Not because they don't like launching rockets, not because they don't want us killed. They do. But they decided to give it up for the time being. It's been 11 years now since Hezbollah was ready to launch rockets against us. Because we had a war in which they drew some conclusions out of this war, and they, since then, are doing all of it. They didn't give up the fight. They still are committed to destroying Israel. So our Palestinian neighbors, or at least their leadership. But they are very cautious about what ways they are going to employ in order to reach their goals. And we have managed to take advantage of that in order to invest in our startup nation and all of that. And we like it quite a lot. So we find this situation reasonable. And what have we done? It was said here. Fighting terrorism is a very long, protracted issue. You can't bring an end to terrorism within a short period of time. Before somebody who's decided to launch on terrorist attacks decides that he's going to change his course of action, a lot of pressure should be put on him. A lot of changes in his understanding of the situation have to occur. So it takes time. When we planned, for example, for the second Intifada, we said this war is going to take 6 years. Eventually it took 5. We knew it's going to be a long and protracted conflict. And, but we said to ourselves, but in the end we should be victorious. We know how to become victorious in the end, we should pay a heavy price. We knew we were going to pay a heavy price. And the main issue in fighting terrorism, and I'm coming back to what Francois said about the language. The main issue in fighting terrorism is to convince the other side that since this is an ideological war, there's no way that he can erode our commitment to our ideology. Because this is the concept of terrorism, is to make you give up on your ideology. Because they are convinced that their ideology is better. They are convinced also that through the act of terror they can make you change your mind. Once you make them realize they cannot change your mind, they have to reconsider. And in this case, of the European case, for example, it's not totally clear for the terrorists if the other side is unbeatable. It's not totally clear. And it takes more commitment. On our side, it was really easy because we knew, for example, that and there's a policy that we adopted that on any terror attack, we should show in a very tangible manner how more committed we become to our ideology. And eventually, that drove this message to them. That, well, wait, let's wait a minute, it's not a good idea. For example, because of terrorism, we established the fence. The fence was very, very bad for them. I said, okay, well, what are we doing? We're actually encouraging the Israelis to take all kinds of steps that are against our interest in the long run. So maybe we should reconsider this idea. So on and so forth. Once we managed to convince them that on a cost-benefit analysis, sticking to this policy is counterproductive, they gave up. And, that is the most important strategic level lesson from our response to terrorism. Now, of course, underneath that, there are two kinds of lessons or ideas that come to mind. One is, how do you make this learning valuable and effective? It has to start with analyzing the real situation in which you yourself are, and in the situation of the enemy. For example, in my mind, not enough attention is being given to the finesse of what's happening inside Islamic societies when you come to address terrorism. Most of terrorism coming today from Islamic society. There's a big battle inside. Somebody here spoke, I don't know if it was Claude or François, one of you mentioned about the we. Who are the we? Do we include in the we those pragmatic Muslims that are victims of this terrorism not less than we are? We in the sense of the West. It's defining the we is extremely important, just like defining the them. And analyzing our assets and our capabilities, just like analyzing their capabilities and the differences between themselves. And the matter of definitions is extremely important. Because one of the things that I see the big debate in the West is how to treat out of the Islamic radicals the different kinds of Islamic radicals. Do we have to treat it in the same way the ultra radicals like the ISIS and Al Qaeda and so forth, Boko Haram, and the realistic radicals, namely Muslim Brotherhood and others? Or should we look at the Muslim Brotherhood and their kinds as potential partners in the war against the ultra radicals? Most of the time, what we do is we choose to leave either to leave this question open, or to lend a hand to the realistic radicals and think that we can work with them in order to contain the ultra radicals. It's a major question. My feeling is that we should treat all radicals as radicals, but because all of them want to change the world order that is based on Western values. But it's a major question that is not decided, and this undecisiveness sends a message of hesitancy to the constituency you are trying to address. And that's something that has to be clear. Clarity is very important here. In my mind, radicals, even the more realistic ones, are radicals, are more sophisticated. Another question is, how well do we know the enemy? How capable are we to understand radical Islamic literature and philosophy? It's a full philosophy. One has to understand it really deeply in order to be able to be effective. If you don't know your enemy, you cannot be effective. For example, one of the major issues in Islam is the issue of Hudaybiyah, which is an agreement that Prophet Muhammad did with his tribe, Quraysh. And it reflects the entire debate that's happening today between the ultra-radicals and the realistic radicals. When you're faced with a very strong enemy, should you hold and maybe step back a little bit, or should you go with your head into the wall? That's a debate that is goes back in Islam to the days of the Prophet. And in order to be effective, you have to know what are the arguments that were made in this respect back then, and how they were interpreted and replayed throughout the history of Islam. And the other thing, which is the simpler thing, is all the learning that has to do with the practical manners of fighting terror. So we have in Israel developed many tools and ideas about the practicalities of fighting terror, and these are all available when it comes both to preventing terror through intelligence and I'm not going to have an opinion about whether you need an FBI or not, but I think developing a system that enables an effective sharing of intelligence is critical. And having much more intelligence is extremely critical. You don't have enough intelligence in Israel. We invested in our intelligence communities a lot, extremely lot. We have invested in our in intelligence communities. We gained out of that not only in the sense that we had better intelligence, but the entire concept of the Israelis as a startup nation came out because we invested so much in intelligence. So also economically we gained from that investment, not only security-wise. I think that Europe invests much less in intelligence than necessary, bearing in mind the kind of threat you're facing. You got to develop the proper level of protection. We have developed a lot of ideas in protection. Much of it is physical protection, like all kinds of people that stand in the entrance to a shopping mall. But some of it is also proactive protection, like the Iron Dome and all kinds of technological solutions that we found that can protect us. It costs us a lot. But again, in the end, first of all, it gives you the security you have to provide to your people. And secondly, we sold so many of them, it's also a good economic investment. And we invested a lot in resilience of the people. That's a well-known case in Israel. And we invested a lot in creating the deterrence, as I said. And the deterrence is enabling us to keep them where they are. They understand. We should retaliate heavily if they try to change, to put us to a test. Of time, of course. One of the things that we did, as Francois mentioned, we chose a little bit different point in the never-ending debate of whether exactly one should stand between our commitment to life as a value and our commitment to human rights and privacy and all of that as a value. And maybe we chose a little bit different place than what Europe would like to take. But many times, when you're faced with this kind of a threat, when the threat is already here, in Europe, it's not about closing the borders and throwing the key somewhere. The threat is already here. You need to be able to reconsider this matter. I'm not telling you where to stand exactly, but you have to reconsider this matter, because clearly one thing I can tell you, one cannot accept a situation where again and again and again and again and again and again, every terror attack ends up with the fact that the terrorists were well known to the security services. That can happen from time to time. It can happen from time to time. Nobody is perfect. But when it repeats itself so many times, it raises a question. Thank you.